and if everybody could just sit down, we are actually going to open this conference, the 21st of Ekik, with a presentation by Peter and Magnus from the Creative Institute. And throughout the presentation, you'll find out more about them and the organization that they're coming from. So I will just leave it straightforward to you.
We'll see. Oh, is this too loud?
Yes.
I can whisper.
Yeah, it's better now.
Okay, better, yeah.
You can hear me as well? No, I'm off.
No.
Can you hear me? The microphone is listening.
You're not muted?
No, I don't think so. Turn off the video. Can you turn the screen? Right now? Hello? Hello? Yes? Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you first of all so much for inviting us to come and speak here. This very interesting topic about internet and emotions. Something that has always fascinated me when how something like the computer, which is really the most sort of rational thing humans have created, a calculating machine, can be filled with so much emotions and fill people with so much passion. I think both me and Peter have stories from our personal lives about our relations with computers and technology filled with lots of emotion. I know just from me that several of the people that I count today as my very best friends are people that I met in the late 90s, early 2000s, in chat rooms on the internet, where all I knew about them was a made-up name, and we were spending countless of hours talking to each other and hanging out there. So it's a fascinating topic. And me and Peter are also working, you could say, with bringing emotions and human behavior and social relations to technology. We work at this place called Interactive Institute, which is it's a publicly funded Swedish research institute in IT and interaction design. And what that means is basically that we do various research projects together with other partners. And I usually explain it that either we work with people who know a lot about technology, but they don't really understand human behavior and social relations, and they want help with understanding, for example, how people use their technologies or what kind of needs people have or how people function. Or the opposite, we work with people who know and work with humans a lot, which can be schools or museums and other cultural institutions or public institutions or something. But they want to know how they can use technology to help them in their practice. So we like to think about new uses for technologies, but alternative uses for technologies, and help people with that.
I can just maybe fill in a bit. So, I mean, Interactive Institute, we're a research institute based in Sweden. We're from the Gothenburg office. We also exist in 5 other cities in Sweden. A research institute means that we work with sort of research and development, but typically closer to society than most universities. So, I mean, we publish papers and we do things like that scientifically. We're typically affiliated with universities, but we're a separate entity. We're not part of the university.
So what we would like to do here is we're going to talk a bit about what we do and give examples of projects we do. But first we'd like to just set the context a little bit around the topic of internet and emotions. And first give a bit of historical context around it, and then also talk about the current landscape of internet and emotions and how the internet is today. So I would like to start with 3 stories from the history of technology, of computer technology. And I have to apologize because this is going to be a quite American-centric history. We're in the European conference here, but a lot of the computer history is American. And the first point in this, the first story is in the 1950s in MIT University on the American East Coast. And here is the first times that computers start to be used within universities. And it's the first time that the term hacker becomes associated with computers. The first people who call themselves hackers, it was referred to a person who found a solution to a computer problem that was not listed in the manual. Someone who figured out a clever way to work around the system and work around the problem that no one had thought about before, such as taking two wires and taping them together instead of following the correct procedure. These people who call themselves hackers, they came, many of them, from the student clubs at university. The most famous is the one we see here, which is the Tech Model Railroad Club, which was a club for making model railroads, which is quite similar to computers. They have lots of switches and very complicated systems to make the trains run without colliding and so on. So these people, the hackers, were part of these clubs, and they also got very interested into computers. But contrary to what people might think, they were not really the grade A students. They were not the best students in class. In fact, they looked down a little bit on people who got very good grades in school. They thought that they called the people who got good grades tools, and they thought that they were only doing what they were told by others, just following the course material. They were more interested in exploring these new systems for the sake of exploring, and not for the sake of, having a career in the future. But the computers at this time were not the computers we use today. They filled a whole room, as you can see here. Several people operating it at the same time. And the access to these computers were guarded by very strict rules. And it was guarded by a group of administrators that the hackers called the priesthood, ironically enough. So they were very careful about the computers and who was allowed in and not allowed in. But the hackers went there at night when no one else was using the computers, and they dwelled into them and started learning more about the computers than the operators themselves, just by their own curiosity. So that's why I put the first emotion related to internet here is passion. Being passionate about internet and being passionate about computers. The second stop along the way is moving 20 years ahead to 1970. At this time, computers in the mainstream were associated with large machines, large organizations, the government and large corporations, and kind of a top-down view, bureaucratic control, and the idea that with computers, you are just a number in the machine. You are not recognized as a full human. The computers dehumanizes people and turn them into numbers. There was even protests at this time of people protesting against the computers. But this changed just a decade later when we got the personal computer. And an unlikely figure in the development of the personal computer was a guy called Ivan Illich. Maybe some of you heard of him. He was a Catholic priest, and he was sent to do missionary in Mexico and Latin America. But when he came there, he thought that he started living with the indigenous communities in Mexico and Latin America. And he started thinking that I have actually nothing to to teach these people coming from the West. It's the opposite. They can teach me. And when he was spending time with these people, he started to think that the Western society was very inhuman and unsustainable, with industry and large systems and so on, and large bureaucracies. And he favored instead something he saw that the indigenous populations used, which was later to be called appropriate technology. Technologies such as the bicycle or foot controlled machines for spinning or washing or something, that you were in personal control of, and the community was in control of these machines. The machines were not in control of you. And Ivan Illich, he got very popular among this group of people, the hippies of the American West Coast, who were kind of disillusionized with politics at the time, and they went out to the countryside to start their communes where they lived together and was going to live together under common rules and a new way of life. And Ivan Illich got very popular with them, but in two different ways. Some people saw him as advocating a kind of a back to the land movement, where you should give up modern technologies and raise goats and live in tents and things. Other people instead saw Illich as an inspiration that you could actually turn technology from these big top-down machines into something of that enabled personal expression. And this is where the drive towards the personal computer came. Here we see Bill Gates laying on top of one of his computers. But also among people like Steve Jobs of Apple, Ivan Illich was an inspiration for him. So here, instead of being a number in the machine, as people had first thought, the computer became a machine that you could put your own personality into. You could program it any way you liked. You could write things with it. You could paint with it. You could do all kinds of human expressions with a computer. So the second emotion attached to internet and computers is expression. Then we jump 20 years ahead once more, and we get to the beginning of, well, the web, at least. The internet had existed since before. In the 1990s, the web is exploding, and with it, internet communities where people all over the world band together and form communities together with people with similar values or interests as them. This had been going on a bit before, but it was in the 1990s that it really kind of exploded. And one big figure of this was John Perry Barlow, who used to be a singer in the band Grateful Dead in the 70s. But now in the 1990s, he wrote a text called the Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace, where he said that the governments of the industrial world, you very giants of flesh and steel, I come from cyberspace, the new home of mind. On behalf of the future, I ask you of the past to leave us alone. You are not welcome among us. You have no sovereignty where we gather. So here it was a sentiment that the internet was about to create a new world based on other values than the old industrial world. And on the internet, the idea was that on the internet you could take part in social relations without being judged for who you were or where you came from. There is a famous cartoon from this time of a dog who sits in front of the computer and says, on the internet no one knows you're a dog. And this was kind of put out as a utopia of the internet, that it didn't matter your background or your gender or something like that. On the internet you will be judged only for what you expressed. And then finally, moving today. Today we live in the age of social media. A large part of the interactions on the internet are now taking place in social media on various platforms owned by companies who provide these services. And today there is quite a lot of anxiety around the internet and around social media. It's become a very hot debate, the public debate. And this anxiety takes many different forms. There is an anxiety around putting content online or putting yourself online and how people will react to it and what kind of responses and reactions you get from putting things online. There is an anxiety about the kind of influences people get from the internet, the kind of news sources people use and how it shapes how people's worldviews. There is an anxiety around a fear of missing out, that if you put down your phone for more than one day or even 1 hour, you miss a lot on the internet and it's hard to catch up. And related to this, an anxiety around information overload, that there is so much information out there and it's very hard to sort. There is also anxieties now around surveillance and what happens to your personal data online. Where ironically, in the previous time, it was considered a benefit of the internet that you could write something without anyone knowing that it was you who wrote it and so on. But nowadays, it's the opposite. People fear that everything they write will be stored and can be multiplied and last on the internet forever without being able to be deleted, and this can inhibit people's expressions. So I want to start with this idea of anxiety around the internet and look at a couple of models of how people have thought about internet and emotions. And this is one of the first things you encounter, is that there is a difference between communication online and face-to-face communication when it comes to emotion. On the one hand, on the one part of the spectrum, you have the rich face-to-face communication with body language and non-verbal cues and so on. On the other side, you have the text, which does not convey tonality or other type of expressions. In face-to-face, you know who you're talking to. You have a person in front of you. There is anonymity on the internet. You talk about the concept of presence when it comes to face-to-face. Two people are present in the same room, whereas on the internet you have a distance. And there is an idea that this face-to-face communication brings out more empathy to people, whereas the internet communication is dehumanizing and brings out people's negative emotions. This is kind of an idea that exists that has to do with the sort of limited bandwidth of the communication. The less non-verbal cues and richness of the media, the more it goes towards that distance. Now this is not really, the picture is much more complicated in reality. For example, even with such limited media as text, people are very creative in working around it, as you know, with emoticons or with developing new social practices where you maybe express emotions more in language than you would when you're speaking, because you know that you don't have those other social cues. There is also, as you know, not necessarily that a more anonymous and detached communication leads to more dehumanizing. In fact, there is a lot of success of, for example, online therapies or various support groups of people with various life experiences or diseases or something, where the anonymous and distant communication can provide a non-judgmental form of communication. However, there is also research showing on the kind of emotions expressed on the internet versus face-to-face. And it shows that there are, in general, more negative emotions expressed in internet communication, which people think is due to that there is less what you call negative social appraisals. That when we talk face-to-face, we are often very wary about what kind of negative responses we will get to our communication. Whereas online, it's less of this. And for some people, it's even sort of very disinhibiting to not have these social cues. The other way people have been talking about the relation between internet and emotions is also that there are certain kinds of platforms and forums that create more negative emotions than others. So for example, I mentioned in the beginning the chat rooms that I was hanging out with my friends, which is was called IRC, or still is called. And here we have smaller groups, close groups, people that know each other and that spend a lot of time with each other, that form a specific community. And in these communities, it's often possible to have a kind of, to set a kind of tone in the communities and set norms in the communities. Whereas it's often that the experience, for example, in news media has been that it is in the open and public forums that you get most of these kind of negative expressions online. So typically comment sections in newspapers sites has a lot of them has closed down because they have been so filled with hate towards the person who wrote it or other people in the debate, and it creates a very polarized debate. On the other hand, there is also sometimes the opposite relation, that people are wanting this very public debate. This is the kind of desired model of public communication, is that everyone should participate with each other to meet other people's views, points of views, and so on. And there is a fear, on the other hand, of this other type of communication where people with similar values and norms gather together in filter bubbles and just reinforce each other's worldview and not meeting other people's point of view. There is also a tension between these two. Similarly, there's also in the public debate often a fear that people who get all their sources of news and what form their world picture online, that it gives them distorted views of the world. And often this is pictured that there is one sort of rational way of looking at the world, where you look at information with a critical distance, and you are able to judge certain pieces of information more or less than others, and you're critical of the source of the information. And so on. And on the other hand, the emotions, which is thought to distort the view. If someone is driven by hate or so on, that they selectively see information and they can't see the picture clearly. And there has been some research on also how people view political information or information about the world, depending on different emotional states. And in this research, they saw that anger was indeed something that prevented people from seeking out information that could challenge their worldview. So people who were angry about a certain issue would not go out and seek out information that contradicted their viewpoint. And the same was with, in fact, with people who were enthusiastic about something. They had really positive feelings towards something. They also stuck with that. But the feeling that was most stimulating people to search out new kinds of information, and also was made people most open to new points of view and challenge their points of view, was anxiety. So people that had reported feeling anxiety over a certain political issue were more likely to seek out various kinds of sources around this. And so here we have, on the other hand, an idea that these filter bubbles on the internet can create a distorted point of view where people just reinforce their own worldviews. On the other hand, emotions also seem to be able to drive people's interest in political issues and so on. So it's not that we should get rid of emotions. So. And also, it's often what's often critiqued is also the increased antagonism on the internet of people who. I mean, sometimes you in the public debate, especially in Sweden, the word radicalization is used. That some people get radicalized into sort of extremist worldviews and so on. But at the same time, it's the same forces sort of that can also provide people with a safe space to explore new ideas and get support from their peers in exploring new issues. And new ideas often comes from the margins also. So it's not always the same driving forces can both create good and bad things. And one very written about example of this, of how emotions affect our worldviews and how the sources of news affect our worldviews. It's also this experiment that Facebook ran on their users. I don't know if some of you might have heard of this, but Facebook took two groups of people that they randomly selected from their Facebook users, and they decided to give one group only positive news coming from their friends and families. As you know, the Facebook news feed does not show everything your friends and families post. It shows whatever Facebook decides will be picked out from what your friends post and show that. So from one they picked news with negative content and showed to a certain group of people. And to the other group of people they picked news with positive content and showed them. And they ran this for a couple of weeks. And then they watched what kind of posts these people themselves generated. And they could see that the group that had gotten the negative posts news, they posted much more negative content also, and things about being sad and, I don't know, the world is depressing and stuff like that. And on the other hand, the ones who got the more positive news stories also posted more happy and positive posts. So just by changing this algorithms of how Facebook sort which kind of news you get, they were able to affect people's emotional states. So it's very powerful what these platforms can do. Before we go more to our own work, there's one thing also that this is the response. Sorry. There is one more also thing that is quite a hot topic nowadays of net hate. Sometimes referred to as net trolling, but I think net trolling is something else, which has a more sort of prank-like character. But net hate is a very serious problem. It especially affects already marginalized people, so women, minorities, or things like that, and it's driving people out of the public debate. Regular users, but also journalists who cannot take it every time they write something. They get death threats or all kinds of things thrown at them. And in general, it also destroys what could have been a very serious and constructive debates on the internet. There is some, the first tactic sort of that was tried in the beginning was to just simply filter out and block this and moderate forums to get rid of this. But this has been proven a quite costly strategy as these things increase, and also when it's not only now sort of individual people with bad intentions who use this, it's also often a political weapon by certain groups to target certain individuals or certain points of view with this netting. So it's been very costly to filter it, and that's one of the reasons that a lot of news organizations have simply shut down their comment sections. It was too much to handle. So one thing that has been lifted up as another strategy to tackle this has instead been counter speech. So instead of trying to get rid of this hate speech or sort of racist expression online or something, counter speech is about always being there at the same place where they are and give alternative points of view or counteract arguments and so on. So instead of sort of building or using your own platform where these things are not allowed, counter speech is about being on Facebook and Twitter and so on and actively engaging with these people. And also sort of supporting people who are being subject to this kind of thing. And this has, to some sense, been quite successful, and also the platforms themselves have been noticing this, because it's also a problem for Facebook and Twitter and so on that these things happen on their platforms. So, for example, Facebook has even given free ad space to some people who are engaging in counter speech against racist expressions. So they can show their ads to sort of target their people. Do kind of a similar like their Facebook experiment, but you show this certain ads to certain people. And also Facebook has been trying to use, if someone shares an article now, there is also recommended articles on kind of a slider below it. And there they are now trying to put sort of alternative points of view on the same topic. So to get rid of this sort of one-sided information. But it's also, it's quite a difficult strategy also that has some problems. And one is of course that a lot of these views arise inside filter bubbles where everyone is only talking to each other, and closed groups and so on that reinforce each other's worldview. And so it's hard to get there and actually engage with these people. Another problem is that the way this algorithms on Facebook, for example, work is if someone who's a friend of me comment on another post, that post is sometimes shown in my newsfeed, and it says Peter commented on this, and I can see it. So I had a friend who engaged in a lot of this counter speech. Every time someone, who might be parents who had kids in the same school class or something like his, said something of racist character or linked to some sort of source, dubious kind of right-wing extremist source, he always countered it and said, "Oh, watch out what kind of news source this is. This is who runs this site," or trying to give counter-arguments. As a result, my own newsfeed was filled with this kind of links and these discussions and so on. So it kind of ruined it for everyone else, because Facebook interpreted this that someone is giving a valuable comment on something I would be interested in because my friend is doing it. Another problem is that this is a very good tactic as long as it's used by nice people with good intentions against people with bad intentions. But a similar strategy has also been used to spread disinformation. So it's not only sort of bad things that is difficult to block, but also good things. So dictatorships often have problems suppressing democratic movements and free speech. And there's always, people are very good at finding ways around censorship and blocking and so on. So for example, in China, it was long, they tried to control the social media in China to prevent people from talking about certain events or speaking about political leaders in a certain way and so on. But they were very unsuccessful because people find ways of using code words. You know, you just said, you talked about the donkey, but everyone knows which politician you refer to when you talk about donkeys, stuff like that. So instead of this, the government hired people to do what you could call counter-speech, but disinformation. So instead of trying to prevent dissident speech, they sent an army of people to comment positively about certain events or political leaders and so on. And even in other places, there's also been direct disinformation. So if people want to have like a demonstration for human rights or something, there can be disinformation spread about where this is supposed to be, or to say, oh no, the military is there, don't go there, it's dangerous, and so on. So actually this, the filtering and the blocking is not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is this kind of disinformation. And it's sort of the same tactics, but for a good reason instead. Maybe we can stop here. This was kind of giving a little bit of a context around internet and emotions and ways of thinking about it, and some topics that hopefully can be food for thought for the rest of the conference. Now we would like to go in and talk to you a little bit more about projects we have done, which you could say is in the area of instead providing sort of positive emotional experiences with technology, and using technology in subtle ways to create emotional experiences. Let's see what's first. Maybe we went through this a little bit in the beginning.
Yeah.
Talking more about this, or should we?
Yeah, I mean, can we just talk very briefly this on? Hello, hear me? Yep. All right. So I'm just going to go through. As I mentioned, we're Interactive Institute. We do research broadly within the area called interaction design, which actually is a quite broad area. I mean, it's everything from technology, from electronics, from software development, to methods for user participation in design activities, to things dealing sometimes with philosophy or politics or other areas. So it's kind of broad. But we work a lot with sort of exploring what can we do with new technology, what can we use it for, and understand that in various different domains. So we work with various actors in culture, in cultural expression, to dancing or drawing or music and different things. We work with education. How can we transform the school system of Sweden to be better fitted towards the needs of tomorrow's society rather than yesterday's or the industrial society of the 20th century. We work with the healthcare sector, trying to see how can we use new technology and how can we actually try to anticipate the needs and work with that, and so on. So I'm going to show you a couple of different examples from that work. But first, just sort of trying to understand a bit of the challenge that we're facing when we're trying to understand what can we do with new technology. It's a very broad question. This is a map of the California island from 1622. And obviously there is no map. There is no island of California. This is just an example of how difficult it is to try to understand the future. This is an authentic map that was done by cartographers in the Pacific Ocean around this time. And some of them sailed from the south, a bit up here, but not all the way. And some of them went from north, through the San Francisco and the Bay Area, and they also went a bit, and then they just extrapolated on the map, and nobody actually went all the way. And that's how we humans do a lot when we have sort of not full information, but we have some bits and pieces, and we try to see patterns and try to extrapolate out of that into the future with given sort of partial data. And that's how our minds work. And of course, at some time, somebody tried to sail the whole way, and of course it didn't work, and then they had to change the map. But this is just to remind us that it is difficult, and this is how our minds work when we're dealing with things that we don't really know. Another example about how we deal with new phenomena and how our minds work is that this is a picture of the horseless carriage from 1896. This is one of the first cars that had an engine rather than a horse driving it. And I have this as sort of an illustration of when we encounter new technology or new phenomena, we try to understand it sort of in terms of things that we already know. So sort of this new thing, it's sort of like this thing I already know, but it's sort of a bit different. It's a bit cheaper, a bit faster, a bit better in some respects, but it's sort of similar to the thing I already know. That's how we work, and that's how our minds work when we encounter new things. That's sort of difficult when we live in a time where it's so much invention and technology development and things happening at a fast pace in society. And things that we encounter, we sort of understand them first as something familiar but partly different. And then after a time, we realize that, there are other aspects of this that we didn't understand at the first time that might have severe consequences, positive or negative, in various ways. And this is also a challenge, especially for us as researchers, trying to understand what are the new possibilities. Because typically there are secondary and tertiary effects and so on that stretch really far, that it's very difficult to see at first. Then again, we try. And a lot of the things that we do that I'm going to show you here is sort of design experiments of various sorts, trying to play and explore with new technology to understand what could we use it for. And sort of a bit like the cartographers, that you sort of have this incomplete map of what we can do with technology in various contexts, with a lot of white spots on it. So we're trying to sort of explore that a bit and fill in more of the white spots. This is just an analogy. These are concept cars from various car manufacturers, and they exhibit these in like Chicago and various places a couple of times a year. And obviously, the cars that are exhibited as concept cars, they're not meant to say that this is the next car that we're going to put on the market. The whole point with the concept cars is to sort of challenge our mind and our notion of what could a car be. That's the point of them, to sort of expand our understanding. And similar to that, a lot of the things that we do in the same way. This is an old project by now that I was involved in 99. That's 17 years back from now. So it's when I was starting with doing research related to internet and human computer interaction. Then me and this guy, Per Karlbring, he's a psychologist. And we got this idea because he was studying psychology and he was studying CBT, the cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a treatment for various kinds of mental disorders, like depression and so on, which obviously works quite well. But we got this idea. Do you really have to go and meet your therapist in person? Like you have an appointment at Thursday, 2 o'clock, every second week, and then you go there, because it has drawbacks. Some of them Magnus mentioned earlier, like you could have a really long way to travel, or you sort of, maybe you're shy and you're embarrassed, so maybe there are limits that you don't want to express yourself in person from this. So we thought maybe we can try this and do it mediated through the internet. So we set up scientific experiments and tried that with control groups and so on, and we could show that internet-mediated therapy for various kinds of mental disorders was at least as effective as the traditional setup. So then this moved on. It's been sort of a lot of interest in the media. Nowadays, this is mainstream since almost 10 years back. So nowadays you can get this on prescription from various places, not only in Sweden but also in other countries. You can get it from, there are companies that are offering these kinds of treatments, and it has also grown into its own scientific area with its own conferences and journals and things like that. But it all started with sort of just a hunch. Maybe we can sort of take this idea and combine it with this other thing, internet. And we combine it and we sort of see what happens. And a lot of new things sort of start in that way, with sort of exploration. You have sort of a brief idea and you want to explore, you want to try something. This is another project that we carried out a couple of years ago that sort of briefly touch on the same area. So this was a European project in FP7 together with a lot of other partners in Germany and Switzerland and the UK and Belgium. But what we wanted to address here was what in sociological terms is called social identity, or relationships between sort of small groups of people where we have strong emotional and social bonds, typical families, but it could be also sort of any type of small, tightly knit social group. So we wanted to explore how can we support that kind of social bonds through the internet. This is an example of how you typically support that kind of social bond in a family or an extended family. You do things together. For instance, you have dinner together, or you meet, or you do things like that. One of the motivations for sort of trying to look at this was I bumped into some research, an epidemiological study from the US, where they asked respondents a lot of different things in the 1950s. And one of the things they asked was, how many people do you know that you trust really, really well, that you could share all your innermost feelings and problems with and discuss that? And sort of the average number in the 1950s was around 7. This was the US, but I think it's sort of similar here in Europe. And then this study was repeated in the early 2000s. And at that time, this number was around 3. So at the same time, we've got to have the development from sort of telegraph and telephone systems to the internet, where we today, and since a number of years back, we can communicate all over the world to a cost that is almost zero, to a time delay that is almost zero, and we have so many means of expression with text and voice and video and all kinds of things. So it's sort of paradoxical that at the same time that we have all these possibilities for communicating all over the world, our relationships in this term tend to be more shallow, according to these studies. So we wanted to explore that a bit and see what can we do. So part of trying to better understand the issue, we digged into social science, sociology, social psychology, linguistics, media and communication studies and things like that, to get some concepts to better understand and be able to reason about this. So one of these things then is the concept of personal and social identity and how that differ. Personal identity is what we typically, in legal terms or in technological terms, we mean with identity. That's your passport. Or it's your ID with the authorities, your social security number, or things like that. But it's also sort of your personal attribute, your length, your hair color, and things like that. It's related to your body. Then again, also in the technical community, it's like your password and your login and your credentials, like that. but the social or collective identity is rather the thing that is related to you and that is tied to certain social groups. Sometimes we distinguish between sort of your personal self and your professional self, and you sort of express yourself slightly in different ways when you're representing your professional self, rather compared to when you're with your family. And of course, this also goes for other social groups. When you meet old friends from college, or when you're with your colleagues, or you're with the sports club, then you have sort of these different social groups. And then you express different phases or different facets of yourself in all these cases. So the social identity altogether is sort of the self-concept that is derived from all these social groups that we're part of. And also we can see that these social identities, the various close social groups that we belong to, they actually correspond to quite fundamental needs for us. All the different social identities that we have, they collectively sort of form our self-image that correspond to this kind of our experience of ourself. Questions like, who am I, what am I doing in this world, and things like that. Those kinds of answers to those kinds of questions comes from our social identities and the social groups that really mean something to us. Alright, so this is important to us, and then we see that even though we have the internet and all the means for communication, yet these seems to become more shallow. Another example of how we build and maintain social identity, or like this. Different kinds of ways of being together, activities where we share different things with various social groups. Another concept that we looked a bit into is strong versus weak ties. It's another sociological concept that is about sort of characterizing qualitative differences in the various relationships we have. And the strong ties, those are the close family and friends, the people who really matter to us and that we care a lot about. Then we have to have the weak ties. They are people who, of course, we count as friends. We have them on Facebook. Obviously, if you run into them on the street, of course you would say hi and you would talk to them, and so on. But essentially, they don't mean that much to your life. They're not essential to your life and your self-image. It's interesting to follow what they post on Facebook and so on, but they're not essential to you. You use them in certain ways, like when you're looking for a new job. Then access to your weak ties is essential for sort of finding out about new opportunities and things like that. In real life, of course, this is more dynamic and heterogeneous and so on. But it's just sort of another concept we can use to reason about this. And then we can see that so-called social media like Facebook, they essentially focus on the weak ties. Of course, you can use it also for the strong ties, but that's not the main purpose. So, it's essentially targeted towards support for the weak ties, which is not essential for us. The strong ties are the things that are really essential for us as human beings, but that is not in focus for things like Facebook. This is essential. One more thing, one more concept here is interaction ritual. It's example of activities that we do together in our social groups, where we build, establish and maintain social cohesion. It's sort of the identity and relationship that goes beyond the individual level and is sort of about us at a small group level. Sort of the identity of our family or our community or something like that. And we build this by repeatedly engaging in common activities. That could be sort of cultural embedded, or it could be on sort of a national level or an ethnic level, or a small, just in your family you have sort of the common traits and common habits that you do. So So it could be things like you're celebrating Christmas, you're going to weddings, but just like having breakfast together with your family. Things like that, that you repeat, that you say hi and you greet each other when you meet, and so on. So the defining characteristics for these kinds of activities are, there is in this social group, you have a mutual focus of attention for the activity and the things that you do together. You have typically a common mood, so you might be happy celebrating something at a party, or you might be really sad if you're at the funeral, but you typically share the mood. There is typically a perceived barrier to the outside. You focus on yourself and the activity that you do. Of course the world is out there, but I mean, you don't really care about the world so much in that moment, but you care about the things you do together. You have to have some engagement in the situation to get something back. If you're at the party and you sort of sit in the corner and you watch everybody else having fun, and just being passive, you won't have fun. You have to do something to get something. And finally, there has to be a reciprocal acknowledgement of each other's engagement. And this is the most important factor, that you acknowledge each other in the situation. So by doing this repeatedly in various sort of constellations, this, according to this researcher, Goffman, is what builds and maintains social cohesion, and ultimately social identity and sort of understanding of ourselves. All right. What we can also see from this definition is that a communication channel is necessary, but it's not sufficient in itself. So it's not not enough to just have a communication channel like Skype. You need to actively engage in shared common activities and acknowledge each other's engagement. Of course, you also need to be able to communicate, but it's not sufficient in itself. So most sort of casual games like board games and card games and so on fall quite nicely into this definition. But also these kinds of activities. Going to church once a week or even more often is another example that fulfills every aspect of this definition. It's even so, this is sort of a simple model of how you could have the perceived social relationship between you and this social group, your family or the community or something like that, which sort of, at some point you do something together, then this increases when you're happy together and you acknowledge each other and so on, and then after some time this slowly sort of decreases if you don't do things together again. So think about sort of old friends that you had fun with 10 or 20 years ago. And at that time, you were together regularly, which meant you sort of went up again regularly. But since then, that relationship has faded, because you did not engage in this, and then sort of slowly decayed away. So you need to actively engage in relationships to keep them alive. Anyway, this model is adapted from Emil Durkheim, a sociologist who actually founded the area of sociology. And this comes from his study of people going to church in France in the early 20th century. So he was trying to understand why do people feel belonging and so on together that went to church in France. So this is sort of the beginning of sociology as a scientific study, comes from the study of people going to church. All right. Just some examples of what we did with this information. We built a system that sort of had a Skype-like system for setting up a large TV in people's homes. We engaged with the families in 3 generations. So we had elderly people and younger people in sort of middle age with kids. So we had 3 generations. And they were people who sort of lived far away. So typically they would only meet, not so often, like once or a couple of times a year because of geographical distance. And then we wanted to see, can we support this relationship in another way? So we connected a camera and audio and so on with really low delays. and had them as sort of portholes between the households. And then it was up to the people at their own will to figure out how to use this. But in addition to just having this sort of video and audio communication, then we developed iPad apps to support open-ended activities together. One example was that we scanned in children's books. And then you would have an iPad at each place, and they were synchronized in real time. So you could sort of select the book, you would bring it up, and you could sort of swipe to change pages, and you can do it from both ends. And you would discuss things and so on. And we're trying to mimic the situation of having a kid beside you and reading a bedtime story or something like that. So it was sort of very open-ended how they would use it. Another example was a card deck where you could play card games. But it was only a simulation of the physical cards and shuffling and things like that. No rules. So you could cheat, or you could sort of teach somebody, or you could do anything. So, I mean, the rules were totally up to the social contract, just like with real cards. Another example was a shared whiteboard, which was used very creatively for all kinds of things. So it was just shared across the households, and they would use it in this case for sort of playing hangman, but they used it for keeping scores when they were playing games, or they used it for support, for helping with homework, or all kinds of everyday mundane activities. And this is what we were after. In order to, in this case, to establish a relationship between the elderly couple and the grandchildren, they need to engage in sort of mundane, everyday activities at a fairly regular interval in order to get to know each other and get sort of a good relationship. And there was interest and there was trust, but before they couldn't do it because of practical reasons. So we sort of tried to explore ways for doing that. There are sort of a lot of studies published about this. But I'll leave that for now and go to another example that in some ways is similar. This is an exploration we did a couple of years ago, sort of trying to combine new materials. One idea that we're working with is to view technology, sort of both electronics and software, as a material from sort of a crafting point of view or a design point of view. So similarly to how we can think about wood or stone or sort of textiles or something like that, we can think of it from a design point of view. What can we build with it? What can we not do with it? What can you express with this material, like wood? How would you sort of form it? How would you work with it in order to build something? Sort of from a craft type perception. So we're trying to see if we think about technology in a similar way, about software and sensors and wireless communication and so on, then we can sort of ask ourselves, what can we build with that material as a metaphor? And then we combine it with other materials. In this case, we combine it with sort of textile materials. So this obviously is a cushion that you have in the sofa that have a function that sort of addresses some of the things Magnus mentioned before. We were trying to explore how we can address sort of emotional communication over distance in various ways, especially sort of bodily experiences and when you're hugging somebody. Yes. So, I mean, that's difficult. So what we did here was that this cushion, basically it's really simple how it works. You pick it up, you hug it. That sort of triggers a sensor inside that measures when you hug it. It sends one bit of information over the internet and the other one lights up, like 1,000 miles away, with your loved one, hopefully is. And if somebody watches that, if he or she is there, then they can pick it up and sort of hug it back. So if you picked up the first one, if your one lights up like 15, 20 seconds later, then you sort of get the response. If you reduce this to technology, it's sort of trivial. But in this context, it actually brings a lot of meaning with sort of emotional communication. All right, yeah, this is just another example. Maybe I need to hurry up. How much time do we have? Do we need to rush to dinner, or can we take 5 more minutes? Or
we can take 5 more minutes.
Yeah, okay. I won't go through so much detail. This is a dog that was done up by my students at Chalmers. So this is also about emotional sort of issues. A lot of people get a dog because they want to sort of have a reason for going out and get some physical activity and get a walk. This dog, you don't do that. It stays in your hallway. And you have a step counter on your keychain. And when you come back, the number of steps you walk throughout the day is transferred to the dog. And then the dog sort of changes its appearance slowly. So if you're walking a lot, then the dog will raise its head and its tail and sort of look happy and happy as a kind of alter ego of your physical activity. And if you're not, it will slowly lower its head and tail and finally get red spots on the back to sort of indicate that now you really need to do something. And this is sort of just playing with materials and expressions. It's playing with, in this case, this is a computer display in a technical sense, but it doesn't look like a computer display, but it shows the results of running code in real time. But it's also sort of trying to find very subtle ways to influence people and try them to get them to change their behavior in a positive way by using social cues and things like that. Because it's not only yourself who sees that. Everybody who is in your home will see this. People visiting you will see this. And sort of it will become maybe a bit embarrassing after a while. So it's sort of exploring and playing at different levels about this. Do you want to say something about this, Magnus?
Yeah, I recommend with this because it's a very recent project that we did with the Aquarelle Museum in Tjörn here, so the watercolor museum, not far from here, where we wanted to support people who were not able to go to the museum to be able to enjoy the museum as if they were there. And our focus was on older people, senior citizens who were in elderly care centers. And what we did for this project was to get this robot, which is basically, it's a self-balancing robot with an iPad on top that you can control remotely, forward, backwards, turning. And then you have video communication on top. So we had these groups of people in the elderly care center getting a remote guided tour by a tour guide in the museum, where they could follow the guide and with his robot and see the museum collection from in there. We could actually show just a 1-minute clip of a recent film. It was on TV4 here and we can end on that note. And you can see how it looked. It's in Swedish, but I can...
På äldreboendet Åkerhus i Göteborg sitter damerna på rad. De visas runt på Nordiska Akvarellmuseet, nästan 8 mil därifrån. Tack vare en robot är det inte längre några problem att vara fyllda 95.
Jag kan inte köra bil och är ensam.
Då var det perfekt att museet kom till dig istället.
Ja, men jag önskar att de kommer dit i många år.
Det är här inne på Nordiska Akvarellmuseet på Tjörn som utställningen Disney, konsten att blicka. Och med hjälp av en konstpedagog på museet guidar han runt damerna bland akvarellerna.
Kulturen är ju till för alla. Vare sig man befinner sig på andra sidan jorden eller man inte har de fysiska förutsättningar som krävs längre. Så tror jag att det är ett steg som gör att kulturen blir mer tillgänglig och så att alla kan njuta av den.
Än så länge är Julius inne på teststadiet. Han behöver utvecklas mer och bli lite mer tekniskt stabil. Men förhoppningen är att han ska få kollegor runt om på andra ställen inom en ganska snar framtid.
Yeah. So, thanks for your time. We have taken a lot of it, but I hope you got an idea what we're doing, and I hope it will help you going forward in this conference.